The lawyer pushed one more heavy folder across the gleaming table. "Daniel Whitmore," he called out. "Cash holdings, brokerage accounts, and the Lake Ashton estate." The room burst into applause. Daniel sat back with a smug grin as relatives crowded around to congratulate him. Grandpa had always known who could steer the family forward. One by one, my cousins walked away with seven-figure checks, luxury properties, and stock portfolios. Every announcement brought smiles, tears, and embraces. Then the lawyer's gaze shifted to me. Cynthia Whitmore. The room went silent. Instead of a folder, he pulled a small envelope from his briefcase and set a single plain business card in front of me. I kept staring at it, certain more paperwork was coming. Nothing followed. Daniel burst out laughing first. "Guess Grandpa finally landed you a job," he said, glancing around the table. "Probably the number for the unemployment line." Laughter rippled through the room. Someone even clapped. I felt every eye land on me, as if Grandpa's final word on me was that I hadn't been worth remembering. The lawyer didn't join the laughter. He leaned in and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "Miss Whitmore, your grandfather left one instruction." I looked up. "Call that number," he murmured. "Alone." I tucked the card into my bag without a word. Nobody tried to stop me. Why would they? In their eyes, the matter was already settled. Daniel had become the golden child of the family. My cousins were suddenly wealthy, and I'd walked out with something small enough to fit in a pocket. Behind me, glasses clinked as someone proposed a celebration dinner. I could hear Daniel boasting down the hallway. "Told you Grandpa knew who deserved the real legacy." That story wasn't quite true. For years, the family had been convinced I'd pulled away from Grandpa simply because I never joined the company. Daniel made sure that narrative got repeated at every gathering. According to him, I didn't value tradition, lacked drive, and couldn't handle responsibility. What nobody mentioned was that I'd shown up nearly every week once his health started failing. Nobody brought up the long afternoons spent discussing novels instead of quarterly earnings. Nobody remembered that he never once brought up business with me. Those were moments I'd kept to myself. I made it to my car before the humiliation could show on my face. The card itself was almost laughably plain. No logo, no address. Just an unfamiliar name and a phone number, blank on the back. For a long moment, I considered tossing it aside and driving home. Instead, I took a breath and dialed. It rang once before a steady, assured voice answered. "We've been expecting your call, Mom." I froze. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" A short pause followed. "Please come to your grandfather's private office before anyone else arrives." The address brought me to a quiet brick building on the edge of the financial district, a place I'd passed countless times without a second glance. No sign marked the entrance, only a small brass plaque bearing Grandpa's initials. Inside, the receptionist looked up as though she'd been waiting for me. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "he's ready for you." She led me down a corridor lined with photos spanning decades. Grandpa shaking hands with executives, attending galas, standing in front of factories I recognized from the family business. At the far end, an older man rose from behind a large desk. "Harold Mercer," he said, offering his hand. "I served as your grandfather's trustee for 32 years. I blinked in surprise. "I've never heard your name." "That was by design," he said, gesturing toward shelves lined with journals and binders. "Your grandfather believed actions spoke louder than words ever could." He opened one leather-bound journal to a page dated months earlier. "Cynthia came by today, never once mentioned money, stayed 3 hours just to keep me company." He flipped forward. Daniel called. 4 minutes. Wanted to know if the succession papers were done. And another. Cynthia fixed the old radio herself because she remembered I liked listening to it. Page after page painted the same picture. I hadn't known any of it had been recorded. He wrote all this down, I asked. Your grandfather did, Harold said. I only kept it safe. My throat tightened. Why didn't he say anything? Certain legal conditions had to be met first, he replied, closing the journal. For now, you'll have to trust the process. Before I left, he handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's familiar script. He was very clear, Harold said. Don't open it until after tomorrow's family meeting. Walking toward the exit, I noticed the reinforced doors, the security cameras covering every angle, the file rooms sealed behind heavy locks. Whatever Grandpa had built here was far more than sentimental. And if the inheritance had truly been settled already, why go to such lengths to build a separate process in complete secrecy? The next morning, headquarters felt nothing like the subdued mood of the will reading. Champagne flowed through the executive boardroom as senior staff, board members, and relatives gathered around Daniel like the transfer of power was already complete. He stood at the head of the table in Grandpa's favorite navy suit. Thank you all, he said smoothly. Grandpa built something incredible, and I intend to keep this family leading the company for generations. Applause followed. Then his eyes landed on me. I'm glad everyone who actually inherited something worthwhile could make it, he added with a smirk. A few uneasy laughs spread through the room. My sister got a business card, he continued. I guess Grandpa figured networking mattered more than ownership. Several executives exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh along. I said nothing. Before Daniel could continue, the doors swung open and every conversation stopped. Harold Mercer walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys carrying locked cases. His composed expression stood in sharp contrast to the confusion spreading through the room. Mr. Whitmore, he said, before any executive authority changes hands, I need all succession proceedings paused immediately. Daniel frowned. Paused? Probate already closed. For the personal estate, one attorney replied, not for everything your grandfather controlled. The room went dead silent. Harold laid several certified documents on the table. These confirm that significant corporate holdings were deliberately kept outside the public probate filing. Executives leaned in, board members began murmuring. One cousin asked slowly, Are you saying Grandpa owned more than what was in the will? I'm saying, Harold answered evenly, the public will was never meant to transfer everything he held. For the first time, cracks appeared in Daniel's composure. His eyes shot to me. This is her doing, he snapped. She's been working behind everyone's back. The accusation hung in the air. Before I could respond, Harold spoke again. Your grandfather anticipated that exact accusation years ago. Daniel stepped forward. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning, Harold said, my client left instructions to address today's events long before he passed. I'll say nothing further until the review is finished. The meeting dissolved into anxious side conversations as every leadership vote was postponed. Outside, I finally opened Grandpa's envelope. Inside was a single line in his handwriting. Trust no one until they show you the final ledger. Before I could ask what it meant, Harold's phone rang. He listened for a few seconds, his expression hardening, then turned to the attorneys. Contact every financial institution now. Freeze all ownership transfers until further notice. By afternoon, the effects had spread through the entire business empire. Banks froze pending ownership transfers. the board postponed every appointment. Attorneys took over conference rooms, digging through decades of filings, while compliance staff moved sealed boxes between offices. The celebratory mood from that morning had completely evaporated. Daniel paced outside the legal department, cornering anyone who might know something. "This is absurd," he snapped at one attorney. "I inherited the company." "You inherited what the will transferred," she said calmly. "We're determining whether that's the whole picture." For once, he had no response. Harold found me in the lobby. "Come with me." He led me down to a secure records facility several floors below, past 2 security doors and a biometric scanner separating the archive from the rest of the building. Inside, climate-controlled cabinets lined every wall. Harold unlocked one and pulled out a thick binder. "None of this went through probate," he said, opening it to reveal corporate ownership charts. Over nearly 2 decades, Grandpa had quietly moved voting control into a privately held parent company. Every major business the family assumed they owned actually traced back to that single entity. Suddenly it all clicked. The business card, the hidden office, the journals, the secret meetings, even the cryptic note about a final ledger. None of it was random. It had all been leading here. Harold slid one last sealed document across the table. "This can't be opened without your authorization." Before I could answer, an alarm went off in the hallway. An attorney rushed in. "We've got a problem." Security footage showed Daniel confronting a records employee outside another restricted room. "I don't care about the rules," he demanded. "Open it." "I can't," the employee said nervously. "Only the trustee has clearance." Daniel stepped closer. "No one has to know." The employee backed off and triggered a silent alarm. Within minutes, security had escorted Daniel out of the restricted area while investigators secured the footage. The incident opened a broader inquiry. Attorneys soon discovered an earlier unauthorized attempt to access estate records shortly before Grandpa's death. What had started as an inheritance dispute was now a full investigation. Daniel stood quietly in the hallway as staff carried in more evidence, the confidence he'd worn since the will reading completely gone. That evening, every relative, attorney, and board member packed into the largest conference room, the tension thick enough that no one spoke above a whisper. Harold entered with a single sealed file and set it down at the center of the table. "Everything changes," he said quietly, "once this is read." He broke the seal carefully. No one moved. The only sound was paper unfolding. "This," he began, "is your grandfather's private succession directive." Daniel leaned in. "Let's just get it over with." Harold ignored him. "Years before his passing, your grandfather separated his personal estate from the ownership of his business empire. He believed distributing wealth and transferring leadership were 2 entirely different matters." Board members traded stunned looks. Harold pointed to the ownership chart on the screen. The cash, property, and investment accounts distributed publicly were real, legitimate inheritances, but they represented only his personal assets. He turned the page. Controlling interest in every major company was moved over many years into this privately held parent company. A murmur swept the room. One executive whispered, "So none of us actually control the businesses." "The holding company does," Harold said, then looked directly at me. "And your grandfather named Cynthia Whitmore as its sole controlling successor." Silence swallowed the room. Daniel shot up from his seat. "That's impossible." Harold calmly opened another binder. "It makes perfect sense once you read his journals." He read aloud. Daniel called again, asking if the succession papers were finalized. Never once asked how I was doing. Then another. Cynthia spent the afternoon helping me sort through old family photos. Wouldn't accept a dime for it. And one more. Leadership belongs to whoever values people over power. I looked down. I never knew he wrote any of that. He didn't want you to, Harold said. He wanted years of quiet, consistent behavior to make the decision, not one conversation. An investigator stood and placed several reports on the table. Our preliminary review is complete. Security footage confirms Mr. Daniel Whitmore attempted unauthorized access to restricted corporate files, and there's evidence of an earlier attempt to access confidential estate documents before Mr. Whitmore's death. Daniel paled. I never touched the will. No, the investigator said, but your conduct violated governance policy and compromised the succession process. The board chairman rose slowly. Effective immediately, Daniel Whitmore is removed from all executive authority, pending final review. No one objected. The same executives who'd toasted him hours earlier sat in silence. Several relatives looked at me with expressions nothing like the mockery from the will reading. My cousin admitted quietly, "We thought Grandpa had forgotten about you." "So did I said. Harold handed me one final envelope. Grandpa's last letter. I opened it slowly. Cynthia, if you're reading this, the test worked. Wealth can be handed down. Character can't. You never visited hoping for a reward. You came because you didn't want me to be alone. Protect the people who helped build this company, and never mistake authority for entitlement. I folded the letter and looked around the room before speaking. I won't run this company the way favoritism ran this family. If you work here, you keep your position by earning it. That includes relatives. No one argued. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was final. In the months that followed, the company steadied. Employees who'd feared chaos went back to focusing on their work. Investor confidence returned and operations carried on without disruption. The relatives who'd received their inheritances kept every dollar Grandpa had left them. What changed was their understanding of who now carried the responsibility for the future. Daniel lost his office, his influence, and the reputation he'd spent years building, all in the time it took to unseal one set of documents. One quiet afternoon, I visited Grandpa's grave and laid down fresh flowers. I pulled the worn business card from my wallet, still plain, still ordinary, still easy to dismiss at first glance. I smiled, tucked it back away, and thanked him quietly for believing in me long before I believed in myself. The very thing everyone had laughed at turned out to be the key to everything they thought was already theirs.